Hi, today's August 10, 2022, and this is Dr. Randall Bach bringing you a coronavirus conversation or thoughts off the top of my head, however you want to look at it. Um, I am kind of feeling under the weather a little bit. Not that it should matter. I don't think it's going to be transmissible over the video, um, but I had some, kind of chills and so forth. We used to call that a summer cold. It's summer here. I'm as tan as I get. I've been out and about. I took a nap this afternoon. I was exhausted. I feel better now. I'm hoping to feel better tomorrow. My wife had almost the same thing a day or two ago. Um, we used to talk about the cold, and I like to reiterate that you can do the Google search filter before 2019 or whenever, and you'll find that about 1 out of 5, 1 out of 6 of the common colds circulating are/were coronaviruses. So there are different types. I think the major ones are adenovirus, rhinovirus, um, RSV, respiratory syncytial virus, and coronavirus. And there, I don't have the others at the top of my head, but you get the idea. This was nothing to write home about. And if we could use the Men in Black memory ablator um, and get rid of all recognition and memory of the pandemic, COVID-19, et cetera, we would think we're just having common colds right now. We wouldn't bother to go check for coronavirus. We wouldn't be testing. People are getting in this kind of thing. I had a college friend who wrote to me today. Um, I had found an ancient manuscript of his, a play he wrote, I guess, in the 80s or 70s or whatever. And he wants it back, but he's under the weather. And he said, "Lo and behold, I can't explain. I've been traveling, and I feel sick, and my COVID test came out negative. Like, what's up with that?" Well, that's one of the 80% of common colds that are not coronavirus. I like to point out that our influenza recognition and probably testing as well has gone effectively to zero. I think we've gone through about 2 years of people not having influenza. And it's not because the flu shots all of a sudden got so miraculously better. We're going to go into a little bit of detail about what comprises a flu shot. Um, and um, there's kind of a few kind of regular actors they put in the mix. It's kind of a cocktail like a Manhattan or something like that, um, or a Moscow Mule. There's some of the, I think, H3 hemagglutinin variety and an H1 background, so that you'll have some of basically influenza year by year is kind of like one-arm bandit with two windows. There's H and N. So it goes H3N2, H5N7, H1N8, whatever. There are certain more common than others. I think there's 11 of one and 18 of the other. So it totals up to like 198 possibilities of influenza year by year by year by year. And since people only live, kind of median age, I don't know, life expectancy at birth is in the 70s, but once you're alive, it's in the 80s. So you don't necessarily live long enough to see every single one of them, and there are some that are more common than others. I think the researchers have only reported 135 out of that 198. So some of them might not be potent enough to really cause problems here, don't get measured, or the combinations don't occur in other animals which act as reservoir for influenza. But I think all said and done, there are about 35 more regular actors who were in rotation. So the great Spanish flu of 1918, I think, came around again. I think it was the 50s or 60s. I think it was called the Hong Kong flu at one point. Don't quote me on that, but you can look it up. And it didn't cause the same damage because people had flu shots at that time. And in 1918, they hadn't. Overall, I've pointed out before that, naive or virgin to a vaccine, I would rather get coronavirus, COVID-19, the original ancestral version, than the Spanish flu without a vaccine, because I think that clearly caused more of a punch back in 1918, 1919, and so forth, than anything that coronavirus did in the full year before vaccines were invented. The reason that we don't really hear much about influenzas on the same scale is that we have flu shots, but we have them prophylactically. They may not be perfect, I understand that, but they're always in advance of the wave of flu. This is in contradistinction to what is being applied now, post facto, after the fact, wherein we're getting, I guess, arm twisting, coercion, government pressure, job pressure, and so forth, to have the vaccine when almost figuratively, but almost literally, the horse has left the barn. That one is long gone. There was a cartoon from the New Yorker. Maybe somebody can post it. These snails, they're wearing cowboy clothes, and one snail is about 3 inches down the road, and the other ones are going to make a posse to go get him. He's the bad guy, and they're like, oh, forget about it, he's long gone. He's like for a snail, that's going to take a long time. But in virus terms, the ancestral version, the big bad meanie, is gone, and it's not coming back because there's a bulwark of immunity, whether it's a vaccine or natural immunity, and things keep mutating. The odds and likelihood it's going to mutate back into the original version is low, unless, of course, it's released from a repository someplace. I'm sure a lot of people have it now, not just Wuhan, China. So there were isolates and so forth. So I guess down the road, 10, 20, 30 years, people could re-release the COVID-19 Wuhan flu, and see what happens. But there's some tapering of natural immunity, of immunity. It happens more quickly with vaccine immunity than with full-fledged natural immunity. Nonetheless, I don't think the COVID-19 era of kind of higher case fatality rates is coming back. Since that time, there has been a gradual decrease in case fatality. I like to look at Europe rather than the United States. And I have this up. I don't think I have it up today, but there's a nice chart at ourworldindata.org or .com, and you can find it. I'll be happy to put up a link. I take out the US one because I think we are going out of our way to test/overtest for coronavirus because there are financial incentives and political incentives to do so. So there's I think COVID-19 was instrumental, as used as a political wedge, whether you like it or not, to get rid of our erstwhile president, the 45th, and to usher in the 46th. A gentleman who stayed indoors the entire election. So it's an oddity that he got the most votes ever. But it certainly was a useful cudgel to pry open easier and less kind of like monitored voting, the so-called mail-in ballots. And I'm going to not get into election stuff, but it certainly was easier then to vote than ever before. And so there's always kind of a quasi-emergency to keep things in the forefront in case that needs to be trotted out potentially. What we hear and see about for instance, monkeypox is not an emergency. I think it might have been declared some kind of emergency, but it's not an emergency unless your behavior veers a particular way, and even then it accompanies almost zero deaths. So it's a direct contact, anogenital, with frequent partners, probably skin slash tissue breakages, letting in a virus into your body. Ugly, kind of unsavory stuff to ponder, and it's been mostly associated with gay orgies. So there's very little, oddly enough. We heard, distancing, masks, and all that kind of stuff for COVID-19 endlessly. And if monkeypox indeed is an emergency, then we should be hearing the same thing to stay away from orgies of that type. I'm doing my part so far. I don't know about you, but you can let us know. What else? So the main thrust and the title of today's talk is COVID-22. And there is somebody who mentioned this term a year ago, and I actually put it in my Overturning Zika book because I was making the same point then, but it wasn't really kind of lifted up and carried through social media. So if you want to do the same, let me know. And I'm not the coiner of this term, but I would like it to be a term of art. I think we should stop talking about COVID-19. Now, there is a minor distinction that, like HIV and AIDS, everyone heard about AIDS at the beginning, but then HIV became talking about the virus, and AIDS is the illness. So not everybody with HIV has full-blown AIDS. Not everybody with SARS-CoV-2, which is the name of the virus. It's the sudden adult respiratory syndrome virus from 2003, China. COVID coronavirus 2, it's the second one in that realm. There was a Middle East respiratory syndrome in the intervening years and very little else. The fact that it showed up in Wuhan, China at the location of the Institute of Virology, I think is more than coincidence. But it's been massaged one way or another. I think that certainly Occam's razor would dictate that's where we should be looking, because they did have samples, and apparently there's a great video by Matthew Tye, Tye, who goes by the handle Lao, Laowhy 6, which is hard to remember. But he kind of details he does the forensics of the Wuhan virology lab at that time when there were turnovers and people missing and all that kind of stuff. Anyway, I'm pretty much on board that it was released. I don't think it was advertently. I think it was a mistake. If it had been done advertently, I don't think they would have, it would have cropped up to the same extent in China per se. But I'm not a spy, as far as you know, and if I am, I can't tell you. Anyway, so why is it important to talk about COVID-22? Well, I kind of bundle it in the COVID-19, the virus, SARS-CoV-2, and COVID-19, the illness. And that has disappeared, but we keep seeing COVID-19 showing up in the headlines. And I'm going to get to a couple of these right off the bat. So where's one? So here, everything makes a little bit more sense if you don't put COVID-19 in the equation. So let's see. President Biden double boosted. So that means he had not one, not two, not three, but four, count them, four vaccinations with the mRNA vaccine against COVID-19. So he is in a good position to fight COVID. Well, ideally and theoretically, he wouldn't be getting it at all. And here's where's the money line? Let's see. Let's see if I can find it. Where's 19? Whoops. So let's see, I'm getting a little blocking here. Okay, we have to continue to use the tools effectively to minimize the severe impact of COVID-19. And it's also mentioned, I think, early on in the page that he has. Oh, here it goes, right here. The second U.S. I apologize for this, so I'll make it a little bit bigger so both of us can read it. The second U.S. president infected by the coronavirus is in a much more favorable position to fight COVID-19 than the first. So Mr. Trump did get COVID-19. When President Trump was sickened in 2020, before the rollout of vaccines, he experienced COVID symptoms severe enough, blah, 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 blah. But President Biden, who tested positive for the coronavirus, now this is probably true. He did test for the coronavirus, but it's not necessarily even in the lineage of COVID-19. COVID-22 is Omicron, and Omicron is maybe not even linearly related. So, there's you out there and there's me, and I like you and all that, but we're probably not related unless you go way, way back, some common ancestor. I've got my family and so forth. There's some people, sadly, who look a little bit like me and vice versa. But COVID-22, Omicron does not look that much like COVID-19. I had a graph up, which I'm not going to be able to pull up fast enough today to show this, that there are, I think, 50 mutations between Omicron and the ancestral version. The early Greek letter versions, alpha, beta, delta, which are the more popular, ones that cause more problems around the world. I think delta was the India version, beta I think was the South Africa version, alpha I forget. But those have mutation differences from the ancestral version in the low tens or so, 10 to 15 mutation. And Omicron is kind of far, far away. And there are papers positing that there's one of four possibilities. And one of them came from mice more recently, has nothing really to do with us. Another one is that it is from having vaccinated immunocompromised humans who basically will harbor and reproduce more effectively some other vaccine, because they don't have a good immune system, but they do have theoretically protection against the ancestral version spike protein. So it's kind of a way, we see this with giving antibiotics to cows. They put it in their feed, regardless of whether they're having illness and whatnot. And at the end of the day, they've built up antibiotic resistant bacteria. Now, bacteria and viruses are very, very different. Viruses are just a little bit of genome. They're not technically alive themselves. They're hijackers in a sense, but they're, quasi dormant. And bacteria, size-wise, I think, if a virus were the size of my phone, a bacterium would be the size of say your bedroom. So they're very different creatures. I get it, but the same kind of population push happens when you get rid of or protect against one. Then there's going to be an invasion from another era or area. We saw this, after 9/11. Nobody came in with box cutters, but then there was the shoe bomber. So now we take off all our shoes, and people, will invariably try other ways. Before those, I mean, people, there was a huge bombing, a series of them with just kind of people putting suitcases in, but not being on the flight. So that got stopped. And so it's always kind of after the fact, we're always trying to cover up the last vulnerability. We see this, with hackers and whatnot. I think Catch Me If You Can is a version of this. They wind up hiring Frank Abagnale to work for the airlines because he's good at penetrating the bad defenses. So this happens with virions. So I'm going to get back to what I'm doing here and talking about COVID-22. So let's see if I can. So a lot of things will be explained. My child, if you, what is it? What's the one from the Kung Fu guy? I forget what he says. But here's NPR. This is just fairly recent, a couple of weeks ago. Even if you're the president, it's hard to avoid a breakthrough COVID infection. So what's wrong with this? This is also not true. And here they use the same terminology. Biden arrives at the White House. He had tested positive for COVID-19. This is incorrect. So he's a 79-year-old. He's not the best, most virile looking 79-year-old either, as we have seen. With his positive test for COVID-19, this is not true. So he has a test that's positive for coronavirus, which may overlap with the appearance of COVID-19. So COVID-19 can make this turn positive, but also COVID-20, COVID-21, COVID-22 can also make it positive, and very possibly COVID-17. Before there was SARS-CoV-2, just the 1 out of 5 common colds. We're never told like how specific this test is, and it has not. I mean, it's changed a little bit over time, but it is. What we have here is, you could say maybe we have an animal tester. So, or what I like to do, the example I like to use is, for instance, a canine tester. So a wolf is a canine, a coyote is a canine, a fox is a canine, and you should, if you had some kind of canine alert, and you have a little, I don't know, kid outside in the pool or whatever, and you could have a canine alert that there's a coyote in the neighborhood. People text and whatnot. They've got some, texting or WhatsApp alerts. Yeah, you should be on the, on the lookout for that coyote / fox, etc. But if it all it does is detect canines or 4-legged furry creatures, and it detects the house cat, or just to stick with canines, it detects I don't know, schnauzers, Pomeranians, poodles, Bichon Frise, and so forth. Your test is going to be not that useful. It's possible you might get hurt from a poodle. It's not yours, and so forth, and you might have an allergy to it and so forth, but you're not going to have the same problem you are much more likely to have with a coyote, particularly in the vulnerable population, those unlikely to defend themselves. So if a 90-year-old is sitting in the backyard sunbathing and a coyote comes along, she's not going to be able to run away. The coyote has dinner. That's sad. Somebody more forthright and able to defend himself, imagine the cast from Yellowstone or whatever, the coyote is going to regret entering. So it's very similar that with the absence of children really are vulnerable to coyotes, but not COVID-19 or the subsequents. So this kind of explains things. I have a lot of people coming to see me, well, inadvertently coming to see me. Comes up in conversation both in my medical practice and with some of the people, the older guys who hang out at the tennis club and whatnot. Somebody recently had COVID-19. He tested positive, and he's got for our tennis club, which is mostly lean, fit people, so forth. He's not, and I worried about him, but he survived it, and so too has Mr. Biden, who's a little bit on the frail side. If this had been COVID-19, the odds might have been a little different for either / both of them. So again, why the distinction? Well, if you start using COVID-22, then the booster is no longer a booster. It's a COVID-19 shot that you're giving too late. Should there be a COVID-22 vaccine? Well, that's a totally separate question. I think Pfizer in March announced they were going to have one, but there's really not the same impetus. And the reasons are multifold. One of them, the most obvious, medical legal one, financial, is that the EUA, the emergency use authorization, you should learn that term, covers COVID-19, not COVID-20, COVID-22. So the wording for as far as Washington E's bureaucrat language is that it has to say COVID-19. So that's why this word is not changing, I believe. But if they were to trot out a new vaccine, they've never done one for a common cold. There's no common cold vaccines for the adenovirus, the RSV, so forth. There might be one for RSV, but it's not universally given. It's not really promoted and so forth because a common cold is not that bad. It's a Schnauzer, it's a Pomeranian, it's a poodle. So why should you vaccine or have alarms in your house for every poodle that passes by? A coyote detector, yeah, that we're into that. But the coyotes are gone. It's similar to the coyotes. I think generationally, all of our domestic dogs literally were coyotes, foxes, wolves at some point, I don't know how many thousands of years ago. And you've probably seen memes on this topic, but the first coyote comes along, smells our fire and gets some food. And then, a few generations later, he's wearing little pink bows and, acting out at kids' parties as a Chihuahua or something like that. So, the dogs that we have as domesticated were probably much more vicious multi-generations ago. But if they're going to depend on the human populace to sustain them without having an animal sanctuary, the jungle, the woods, or whatever in which to go, then they are going to basically self-attenuate to not killing humans. If poodles as a breed and pit bulls, this happened with pit bulls a few years ago, pit bulls were singled out, rightly or wrongly. I'm not a dog expert, as those most likely to bite. I think that's true. The question is how bad and how much. Are they sharks, or are they, kind of like a little bit worse than regular dogs? And so there was a bill to outlaw them in various municipalities. I'm not sure where it went, but on the gradation, so you could go from coyote to pit bull to Pomeranian, poodle, and whatnot. Right now, Omicron probably is somewhere along the poodle range. And if you have these poodles, they don't want to almost literally bite the hand that feeds them. If they do, they're going to be put down. They are not going to reproduce and so forth. So if there is some strain in their minds that's like, oh, kill humans, get people and so forth, then that will peter out because we react to that, and we will be getting rid of that type of dog. So whether it's the vicious version of pit bulls or the ones that Michael Vick had and so forth, those are there under certain circumstances, but they're not going to last and generate through the whole population. The coyotes and wolves still are with us, but they don't need us. So the more vicious canines exist and coexist in a sense with us because they don't need us. They don't have to be nice to people, and we don't have to be nice to them. We're not, and it's vice versa. And so if now and then we kill a coyote, there are plenty more coyotes or foxes and so forth in the woods from which to make more coyotes the next generation and so forth. They're not relying on us. The coronavirus initially, the COVID-19 version, frankly, the 2003 version, because that one came zoonotically from animal reservoir, that one didn't need humans, and it showed up, boom, with a force. And that's very much like the influenza, which has an animal reservoir and can come in, boom, and doesn't really care about people because it can go back to, I think a lot of them are in pigs and some of them are in chickens and so forth. And they have their own animal reservoir, and they can percolate and make new versions over the succeeding summer. And then they kind of, when people are closed in China, as the weather gets cold on the farm circuit, the peasants and so forth, they bring their pigs in for both for the pigs' warmth and for their own warmth to help heat the house. And so there's a lot of respiratory contact with the pigs. And so there's a new version of influenza showing up all the time. So it's while we're on the topic of influenza, if I did what's kind of espoused in these articles as giving a booster to the flu, and I said, well, I got a booster to the flu. It's the 2019 flu shot. I'm going to give that to you. What would happen? Well, probably not that much would happen to you because it just wouldn't necessarily protect you for the upcoming version. But if there were a side effect, and I didn't really have any benefit to having given it to you, especially if there were more up-to-date flu shots, I would probably be sued for malpractice, or at least kind of finger pointed and told not to do this in the future. Like I said, the flu shot is kind of a little bit of a cocktail, and has some kind of generic H3 and H1 versions and so forth. And I think there's an influenza B or two of those. And then they try to get the strain such as they're able to predict from the markets in China and so forth, or wherever, for the next version. But there's no real sense in getting another flu shot if you had one, say, a year or 2 or 3 years ago, if they're not going to provide something new. So we wouldn't keep boosting with the influenza shot from 2018. We could stop making flu shots by the same logic, as it were, that we're calling the COVID-19 vaccine a booster, a booster, a booster, a booster, double boosted, triple boosted, quadruple boosted, another booster. We could do that. We could stop making flu shots completely. and just give the 2018 version or the 2019 version, call it a booster every year. Get a booster, get a booster. But we don't do that. Why don't we do that? Because it doesn't make any sense. And we make new ones. It's dangerous enough to make new ones. We go out of our way to do so. And there you have it. I think I've kind of somewhat exhausted myself, if not the topic. Let me see if there's some other things I can get to on this front. So I apologize. So I think that was a lot of my points. I do want to emphasize that the COVID-19 vaccine has not changed since its inception. As far as the testing, what exactly is it testing? I think that changed at some point because the COVID-19 spike protein, the ancestral version, no longer around. And a more knowledgeable friend of mine pointed out, if I can find it here, that they changed the endpoint of what they're testing for. Let me see if I can find this. Okay, so he said they are not testing for the S protein with PCR anymore. They are now running two letter N protein sequences in the RDRP. They have never shown us that the PCR is specific for the SARS-CoV-2 RDRP or N protein. That data is all produced by the manufacturer, and we don't know what sequences they used for controls, and they do not do controls for those in the actual product test. So basically, these are existing kind of on their own. For your information, I'm going to look up the RDRP because I don't know that. RNA-dependent RNA polymerases. There you go. They've changed what they're looking for because the SARS-CoV-2, the original 2019 version, is not only not around, but it's not around to the extent that they can't even find that. So they wound up looking for something else. So I'm going to just put this up here. This is the RDRP, RNA-dependent polymerase. And for what it's worth, I mean, I think, nice pictures. I'm not sure it's going to help you that much, but this is, virus stuff. This is how they replicate themselves and how they let us make us do their bidding. I'm going to show you. Let's see if I can find. So this is the current version that we have out here. This is from covariance.org, 22B Omicron. So the research people, they call this BA.5, as you can see here, and Omicron, but the name is 22B. What does 22B mean? Well, it's the year 2022. B means it's the second discrete version of Omicron to come out that's different enough from the first one that got its own name. So there was 22A and there's 22B. If you look on the left-hand column, you can see that the researchers, they use my terminology. So they're going 2020, I, H, J. I mean, the alphabet looks a little bit off there, but here we go. 21A is Delta, 21K. So at the end of 2021, we got the Omicron, another Omicron, and then they went back down because it's 22. They started over at Alpha, Beta, Charlie, Delta, and so forth. So these other ones will come around at a given point. I can kind of show you. Let's see if I can find. That's the same one. All right, so I can't be necessarily my own producer at the same time as this, but these things come in waves. So the covariant.org, they don't even look at the ancestral version because it's long gone, like those snails. Anyway, so I think that might cover it for today. What can we gain from this? Well, if we called it 2022, COVID-22, and we could, I would have this name cover both the virus and the illness from it, or maybe even take it away from COVID-22. If we just call it common cold 22, we would go less, bat crazy, no pun intended, over this and kind of get on with our lives. We would realize we get colds, and again, now and then somebody's going to, die from a cold. It can turn into pneumonia. In my hospital days and after certain points, we used to call pneumonia the old man's friend because people don't live forever. And when you get elderly / very elderly, you're infirm, you're nursing home level, you're not clearing your mucus. So when pneumonia comes along, can start as a flu, and then it's goodbye, we miss you, and so forth. And a lot of times there's relief because those people weren't necessarily They were on their last legs. They don't have, they weren't participating and so forth. So if a cold knocks you over, a lot of times that's you were knockable over. I think I'm going to call it a day for today. I hope to survive my own little common cold. 22. I don't know what letter I'm up to. XX, whatever. And I think you should try to think of and use this terminology, COVID-22. It's going to make a lot more sense. In summary, it's going to solve silly headlines like why'd you get 4 boosters, 4 vaccines, and you're still getting this? Well, because it doesn't cover this. Why are you getting breakthrough? Well, it's not breakthrough. It's a different virus. COVID-19 vaccine covered COVID-19. This one's completely different. I'm going to leave you with one of my favorite analogies. I apologize if you've heard this before, and I apologize to Alec Baldwin in advance, but of the Baldwins, I mean, there are, I think, 4 prominent actor brothers. I remember the names of 3 of them. There's Alec, Stephen, and Billy. And then there's Haley Baldwin, who's married to Justin Bieber. She's Alec Baldwin's niece. So if you have Baldwins and you've heard that Alec Baldwin shot somebody on the set, and you have a party, and you don't want him there because whatever. So you give your security guard a picture of Alec Baldwin. So he's basically immunized, or your house is immunized against Alec Baldwin. So Alec Baldwin tries to show up, he is sent away. He's not allowed entry and so forth. Your house is safe from Alec Baldwin. Now Stephen Baldwin comes along, and he looks Alec Baldwin enough, possibly to get in. If you have a very astute guard, maybe he can differentiate between Stephen and Alec. And Stephen's not as dangerous. Maybe he's got this little bit of the, kind of temper that Alec Baldwin had, or some of the peremptory behaviors. I mean, Alec Baldwin not just shot somebody, but he's kind of punched paparazzi and so forth. Maybe they deserve it. I have no idea. But he's not quite there. Billy Baldwin, another character. So all the Baldwin brothers, maybe your vaccine, your policeman out there is not that good, but he's good enough to notice Baldwin-like characteristics, so he doesn't let any of them in, or maybe not. Either way. But then when Haley comes along, she's a different generation, like Omicron. She's somewhat related because she is a Baldwin, but she's not that Baldwin. She's not one of the brothers. She doesn't have as much genetic overlap as they do. She's a gal. She's younger. She's not dangerous. She's hanging with Justin Bieber. She's got her own career. She doesn't have kind of the interest in being a Baldwin, a brash Baldwin brother, and she's not. And so she should get into your party, and you shouldn't worry about her. So if you start saying, well, we have an Alec Baldwin at the party now, Haley's here, Haley Baldwin's here, well, people would laugh at you. It's like, that is not Alec Baldwin. Like, what planet are you on? That's Haley Baldwin. Very, very different, and as I described above. So, what would be the point there? Well, again, COVID-22 would differentiate and provide a lot of clarity to incorrect terminology, such as we've seen lately. And I think there you have it. Let me know if you like any of this stuff, and pass it along. Feel free to share. I always try to give a little plug at the end. I've got my book, Overturning Zika. That's me, the name, not the mosquito. Although I've been told I'm a pest now and then. Please go buy it on Amazon and pass it around. I really could use a review, and even more so a great review or good review. And they're better if it's somebody who's purchased the book, because those are verified reviews. So that will help me, and it'll help solve the last great pandemic. Nobody remembers it much anymore, but Zika microcephaly was supposed to cause 1 million extra microcephalic babies who would have very limited capabilities for life per year around the tropics. This has not happened. Microcephaly is ancient, and there will always be some cases, but there's been no increase, and Zika has been tested, and there's been no association ever since then. There probably wasn't at the time. So that's my Zika book. Please let me know if I can